Clinical occupational therapy groups outside a mental health setting. Hi, I'm Louise Fouché. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Here we discuss tools, tips, and techniques to make you an effective group facilitator. So this past week in the Allied Health in South Africa Facebook group, there was an interesting thread, and the title of the thread was OTGrow mental health groups. And so there were a couple of assumptions that I want to clarify today. One of the things is the concept of calling it an OTGrow group. So we use the interactive group model, which is the model that OTGrow trains therapists in. But it is a specific interactive group model developed by the University of Pretoria at the occupational therapy department by an occupational therapist for occupational therapists. The second assumption was that it is only facilitated in mental health care setting. And although the majority of occupational therapists that are implementing the interactive group model and groups run on those principles are within a mental health care setting, it is by far not the only setting in which these groups can be facilitated. So I thought maybe you'd like to hear some of the groups that I, over the years, have facilitated outside a mental health care setting. These groups all had a clinical component to them, and I think that's important to understand that. There's a clinical component to them, and yet they are not within a mental health care setting. All of them, I use the interactive group model and I use the principles, even though the content might have changed depending on the target group or the users that came to the groups. So here's just some of them. They're not a total comprehensive list, but I also want you to listen and maybe give your imagination wings and not think that occupational therapy groups need to be only limited to a mental health care setting. They can be within any field of occupational therapy. All right, so let me give you some ideas and tell you where I have facilitated groups. So the one was mothers with children with disabilities, and I ran groups through the Association for Persons with Disability in the Breede Valley. So we had a group running in Toes River, in the Dorings, in Worcester, and in Rawsonville. And many years ago, I actually ran a similar group, but through the Baby Therapy Center in Pretoria. And so it had clinical elements, but was definitely outside the setting, a mental health care setting. Other groups that I facilitated was team building, again, remembering my principles of the interactive group model and the procedures that I used this model specifically for team building that I have done with practices and also for heads of departments or within occupational therapy departments. I have been very privileged this past year to be involved in the More Than and Hetty Pool Family Trust to train leadership skills in ECD practitioners, mostly principals and MPO leaders. And one component of that year leadership program was a strong therapeutic healing group that you made use of all my interactive group model principles. I've also been privileged to facilitate home-based carers, a group for them that was suffering from burnout during the COVID epidemic, and similarly, an online group that I facilitated for clinical associates in collaboration with the University of Pretoria for clinical associates that were suffering from burnout or to prevent burnout while they were posted far and wide during the COVID pandemic. I've also facilitated Remembering Our Heroes, which was also through Association of Persons with Disability. And at the Nuwe Scaling MPO for homeless people, we've ran several groups for them. I've also run a group at Tilbach for social cohesion. So as quite a divisive community in terms of having solos of different communities, I have facilitated a social cohesion group. I've also facilitated again through APD, a group for youth with disabilities who were entering the open labor market for the first time and were really petrified about what was going to be the expectations and whether they would succeed. And so a clinical program was offered for them there. I've also been involved in Toes River, which I think I've spoken about a couple of times, and to empower the community and to move away from a handout mentality to realize that they have a sense of agency. And we ran 4 groups there over a period of a year, which was also a wonderful experience. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but I hope this has opened up your mind to realize that even though it's a clinical group, because it still has elements of the interactive group theory, I'm still facilitating social participation. That there are endless options and for you. And these are not just outpatients or inpatients and not just limited to mental health care setting. So maybe in this coming week to give your imagination wings. Where else can occupational therapy groups be presented that are not limited within a mental health care setting? And in the meantime, happy facilitating.